Hey, this is Jonathan from SyniteAudio, and I've decided to do a little something special for this year. So, yes, it's July 4th, and, well, as I have here, I've made a little firework generator. It's a blocks patch. It's very, very simple. I will include the patch in the description. However, well, let's just see what it sounds like. So it works with, I've got this gate trig from the node in, and the pitch is also controlling the key tracking on all of the filters. And I've broken up the explosion or the firework into three parts. So there's the initial explosion, there's the sweep, and then there's the actual mid-air explosion. So if I mute all of these parts. So this is the initial explosion. Oh, right, I forgot I have that going into the reverb as well. Then we have the sweep. So this sweep is, you can just mute it as well if you don't really want it. If you just want the explosion and the little initial blast, that also sounds like this. And I've got a random source for mod source B. So since this is using all stock blocks, it's it took a while because I had to try to create some sort of like low-end generator and all that fun stuff. So that's what the drivers are here for. And yeah, so the mod source B, this is going on all the filters as well as envelopes, the drivers, and the effects stuff. So the explosion and the delay, which should actually be up here. But oh no, actually, yeah, because they're part of the main explosion sound. There is the initial explosion and the sweep are somewhat going to the delay and reverb, but that I'll show you how all of that works on the in the structure view. So the initial concept of a firework generator is you have some sort of initial explosion. So I've got my gate triggering this initial explosion envelope. I've got a sample and hold for white noise, and then I've got a filter with a somewhat high resonance for low end. The white noise and the low end get added together and ran through the driver, which is going to create some of that sizzle with the amplitude modulation, and that runs into two filters in parallel. So we've got some low end with the bandpass and a high end with bandpass, and the filter also responds to the envelope as well as the mod source random source on B. And that goes into a VCA for that, which runs from the base ADSR. Below that, we've got the sweep. So this is just a simple ADSR that sweeps a Paul filter with a high resonance, running into another SVF that gets its cutoff also modulated from the ADSR. Also slightly higher, low resonance. This is just to kind of tame that high end a bit, coming from the Paul filter, and then that goes into the VCA with the modulation source coming from that ADSR. And below that, we finally have the explosion. So this is the explosion ADSR, which is the master ADSR. That runs this sample and hold white noise generator because I have it in trigger and hold, so unless there's a trigger coming in, it'll just keep producing noise. So these are my noise generators. The only one, pause for a second, the only one worth noting is the sample and hold for the random source, which is set to sample and hold. So every time I press the gate, it will pick a random source for mod B. Anyways, so these two, so this runs into the explosion, which the white noise from the sample and hold gets filtered a bit, added a little bit of distortion and a little bit of color based on the random source, and then that runs into an SVF for more low-end sort of control, and then finally into the delay and the reverb. The VCA here is actually after the filter. This is here, and it's modulated by the ADSR. So now that we've got the front covered, I've got also on the structure view, all of it is also broken into 3 parts. So we've got the initial explosion with the comment for that. We've got all of the sweep function right here, and then we have the explosion function down here. It all runs into a mix 4. So I've got, so all of this is pretty self-explanatory. The mod B for random source, and then everything else I covered. All of the filters are also key tracked, so which coming from the pitch here. So that means that I can play on the low end and go up an octave or 2 octaves. It opens the filters a bit more, so which is kind of cool. Also these, I think this, sweep as well. Gets control as well. Okay, so the way that I set up some of this stuff, because we have to have the explosion trigger after the sweep and the initial explosion is kind of done. Mainly the sweep. You want that sweep to go all the way down to a reasonable-ish volume before it triggers the envelope for the explosion. So what I have here is I need the sweep to also have a full amplitude. So I've taken the gate output, compared it, so if it goes greater than 0, it outputs a value of 1. So I have a stock value of 1, or static value, which is going to get subtracted by that value of 1, which means that these envelopes will always be like basically active. So the minute I press a key, so if I hold my key, it turns them off, and once I let go, then it activates all of the envelopes. So this allows me to make sure that it runs through the ADSR completely, and I can shape the sweep and the initial explosion however I want. Now, to make sure that the explosion section gets triggered after, I just take the output of the sweep, the ADSR for the sweep, and I just compare it to a static value. So in this case, when the ADSR's output goes lower than 0.5, then it triggers a value of 1 into the explosion generator. So what this does is when the sweep is above, it outputs a 0, so the gate is not active. Now I can actually show this by looking at the ADSR for the explosion. As you can see, the gate is currently active. If I press a key, it's still active while these two are inactive. And once I let go of the key, these two ADSRs will receive a gate and will activate and trigger, while this one will be deactivated until these two are done, or passed below that threshold point. There you go. That's when it finally releases and then gets triggered. So this value here, I set it to 0.5. You can change it to whatever value you want. Obviously, the closer to 0 it is, the longer it'll take for the explosion to trigger close to the sweep. For example, if I set this to 0.1 and I press a key, it takes much longer. If I do 0.9, it doesn't really make sense because it's so close to the initial sweep that audibly doesn't really, your brain doesn't really match the two. So I set it to 0.5 and it just seems a little more natural. I kind of have it set, worth mentioning, with the sample and hold with the random source, that when the envelopes are, when the sweep is longer and the initial explosion is a little bit longer lasting, the actual explosion itself will also be longer in a decay. So in short, the longer the sweep, the bigger the explosion. If that makes any sense. And then the shorter the sweep, the smaller the explosion. So you'll notice that I do have some stuff in here that are not blocks. These are just primary modules, like the compare, the subtract, this compare here. This addition module is to add the low end explosion, initial explosion with that white noise. This is to add the two parallel filters together, so the high end and the low end. I didn't use any blocks modules for that because I think there's a bunch of stuff on the front panel, and these are just very simple things that you don't necessarily have to incorporate in that sense. It's worth noting that, so this is the initial explosion. This gets added to the sweep, as I mentioned, because they both go on channel 1 of the mixer. However, they run through this attenuator here, so a quarter of the output of this volume goes through a filter, which just gets rid of the high-end sweep portion, and that runs with the explosion into the effects. So if I open this up, if I say 120, and when I press my key, you'll hear more of that initial explosion and the sweep in the delay and the reverb. And I can actually exemplify that by muting the explosion. Also, this should be explosion. I was typing too quickly. But yeah, so that's what runs through that. I have it set to roughly 60, just to make sure that the sweep isn't too pronounced in the delay, because the delay will kind of create a weird sounding vibe from that. And then the delay runs on channel 3 and the reverb on 4 with the explosion on 2. You have 4 channels to mix, so if you want less of the reverb and more of the delay, or less of the delay, more of the reverb, that is also possible. Yeah, it's a very simple blocks patch. I like it. It took me quite a bit, but I wanted to do something special for 4th of July, and, you know, being in Reaktor, I figured, hey, why not try to make some sort of generator that can, that not only somewhat sounds realistic, but can also achieve what we'll probably be hearing the most on this day. So this is my Firework generator. I hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe if you liked the video. I'll be posting more stuff, and yeah, thank you for watching.